I came across this story. I know we've talked a lot about, crossing the border, U.S. Canada, ever since Donald Trump. Extra inspections that, of course, have happened as well. What's really sort of weird in this story is when I first read it, I thought it was talking about Canadians still, of course, trying to say drive across a U.S. border, being stopped and asked questions. And this is the same story we had a few weeks ago, right? And when I brought it up at the time, people were saying, well, yeah, it was really bad for me. They pulled me over for no reason. We actually had a guy who was, I guess, trying to get to Boston or just coming back. But now the story, as I understand it, is remember, you clear customs if you're driving into the U.S., right? And you're in the U.S. Now, we know there have been a couple of instances where people, as Canadians, were perhaps randomly stopped while there. But the story I'm hearing is someone who'd already gotten into the U.S., so they'd cleared U.S. customs. Now they're coming back into Canada. So the only border you clear, right, is the Canadian border. Well, you'll be asked where you were, all that kind of stuff. But that's Canada, right? That's Canada customs. These people were stopped before they got to Canada customs by U.S. officials and were talked to, in some cases had cars searched at that point. I'd never heard of that before. So I want to follow up on this story because apparently the gentleman we have on to talk about this is an immigration lawyer, by the way, named Len Saunders, had never heard of this happening before either. Mr. Saunders, thanks for taking the time. We appreciate it.
How are you, Aaron?
I'm doing pretty good. So this is news to you as well. How many cases, anecdotally, have you heard?
Well, so just to kind of give you I'm a Canadian. I practice U.S. immigration law in northern Washington state. My office is in what's called Blaine. And Blaine is the city just on the American side of Peace Arch. Peace Arch is the third busiest port of entry on the northern border. It's just south of Vancouver. And so I've been practicing U.S. immigration law in Blaine for about 20 to 25 years. In the past, you would see these random outbound checks, but the way they worked was there'd be like an Amber Alert. So somebody would be, abducted, and they would be making sure they're not taking them from Seattle up to Vancouver.
Right.
Or there'd be a fugitive. Like, there was always a specific reason. So I've actually seen them in the past, but they were very random, and they were always for a very specific reason. So what happened was last Thursday, at our two major ports of entry going north, and this is like the I-5, that's the major corridor on the West Coast, they were stopping every single car going into Canada. They were not just randomly searching. They were going through the trunk. They were going through the hood. They were asking questions. It got so bad that people literally parked their cars on the freeway and were just walking around because it was such a delay. So this happened on Thursday. It happened on Friday. It happened on Saturday. They took Sunday off. I guess they went to church that day. It started again on Monday. On Tuesday, it still continued. And I actually went up to Canada just to see what was going on. So the car in front of me, they stopped. I actually took pictures because I'm like, I want to get proof of this. They opened up the trunk of the car. They took about 3 or 4 minutes to question the occupant. They then got to my car, but they all know me, right? I've been practicing so long, so they just waved me through. So I was kind of the rare one that they didn't check. But it was, it was something that was not routine. It was basically them checking every single car going into Canada, which most of them are Canadians, just coming down to go grocery shopping, go to Costco, go to Trader Joe's, get some gas. So it seems like a complete waste of government resources. And my only reaction was, why are they doing this? Crazy.
To which and I've seen the statement here from U.S. Customs and Border Patrol saying these are, quote, routine inspections, but you're describing anything but routine inspections. What do you think this is about?
It's absolutely not, Aaron. It was not routine. Routine is if there's an actual reason for doing it. But they were doing it, on a daily basis, which for me is shocking. They actually didn't do it today. So I think word got out in the media that they were doing these inspections, and they've seemed to have backed off for whatever reason.
It's interesting. When we first started talking about this story, post-Trump and everybody worried about going into another country, even Canadians going into the U.S., which is something Canadians typically, you'd know this, never really, think twice about, right? It's pretty routine. You go to the border, you present your passport or your Nexus card, and you're good to go. It says, or it seems to me rather, that this whole thing has changed rather dramatically based on what you're describing, based on what we've heard anecdotally here. Is there any idea of why this is going on?
Well, everyone, that was kind of the $1 million question. And at first, everyone thought, well, this is the federal government in Washington, D.C., but I haven't heard of it happening at other ports of entry. So I was speaking a few days ago to one of the local officers, because I know them all, right? I live in the town. They're all there, all these U.S. immigration officers. And I said to one of the officers, what on earth is going on? And he goes, oh, we've got a new APD. Well, an APD is what's called an area port director. So our last area port director has been temporarily reassigned over to Buffalo. And I said, okay, I just figured they used someone local because most of the officers, lived or grew up in northern Washington state. And he said to me, oh, no, she's from San Diego. She's come up and she's using her enforcement, skills from down there. That is such a different, area for immigration. Sure. I went to law school in Southern California. You can't compare the San Ysidro Port of Entry, south of San Diego, to Blaine. We have, nice parks and no fences and flowers at the ports of entry versus 20-foot walls. So the only thing that I can guess from what the officer told me was we've got kind of a new sheriff in town, and that new sheriff in town doesn't understand that most Canadians aren't coming down to do, suspicious activities, and they're only just going grocery shopping. So it's a complete lack of common sense and a complete waste of government resources. And it's going to really make the few Canadians who are still coming down here not want to come down. Who's going to come and get gas and go grocery shopping if they have to wait in line for an hour or two just to leave the U.S. before they hit Canadian immigration? It's appalling.
So it sounds like someone doing some power tripping in a new job there. And it's funny, you mentioned that border, of course, in San Ysidro. So we're not talking on the border with Mexico here, which has thousands of people, I guess, streaming across the border in both directions every day. What do you tell people who, are, well, to your point, I guess, why would you want to go do this if this is what you had to go through every time? Have you had a chance to speak to this person? Are you going to have a chance to speak to her?
Very difficult to speak to the upper echelon, but I know a lot of our local, like our mayor of Blaine, our city manager, they're wanting to get explanations because this is almost like the final nail in the coffin of Canadians coming down. Even the Blue Jays that are coming down to Seattle for a weekend series where they typically sell out the Seattle ballpark, it's only a quarter sold out. There's nobody coming down these days. And when Canadians hear about what the Americans are doing to the outbound traffic, it's going to completely kill cross-border traffic. Our town, it's worse than COVID right now. And nobody's getting any kind of, government bailouts because it's very, specific to the border communities that are showing all of these decrease in traffic. So it's just a lack of common sense by the American government.
I would just ask as we wrap up here, with respect to what you're seeing, you're an immigration lawyer. People talked about the fact that all of a sudden after, Donald Trump got elected the second time, more Americans would want to come or consider coming to Canada. Have you seen anything that reflects that?
I never saw it in his first administration. When people would say, oh, you must be getting lots of calls from Americans going north, I never saw it. I'm seeing it now. There are definitely a lot of Americans who want to flee this country and go to Canada. It's amazing how the attitude has changed from his first administration to the second. And you have to remember, Aaron, we're only 100 days in. Yeah. We have another 4 years to go of this kind of federal, tactics with trade tariffs and, trying to make Canada the 51st state. It's exhausting for me just to try to keep up with what's going on a daily basis at the border crossings.
I was going to say far, less than an ideal situation, really, either way. Do you hear from Canadians, by the way, trying to get into the U.S. as well, or do you deal mainly with Americans?
No. So I deal just with Canadians.
Oh, just Canadians,
south,
okay.
And they're scared. They hear about Canadians being detained, that Canadian from Vancouver who was detained on the southern border. I knew her. I talked to her before she did that. And I told her that was a bad idea because of this current administration. They're concerned about their cell phones being gone through. They're concerned about being detained, everything. So it's like the perfect storm for Canadians not wanting to come down here. The low Canadian dollar, everything adds up to a lack of Canadians willing to cross the border into the U.S. I understand. I get it.
Yeah, and we're seeing that, of course, with tourism numbers as well. Flights being cut to the U.S. from Canada, too. Mr. Saunders, really appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Aaron. Have a great day.
You too. Len Saunders, U.S. immigration lawyer. So he's based in Blaine, Washington, right? So on the BC-Canadian border, and that's what he's seeing. It's great. Good luck.